Hey there, Internet friends. Welcome to another early Patreon access episode of That Nerdy Site Show. Normally it's a weekly podcast where team members from That Nerdy Site get together to talk about our lives and all of the nerdy things we love about them. But for these monthly early access ones, we kind of tend to hone in on like a specific topic and just kind of talk about that as a little bonus episode for our patrons that then goes live to everybody a month later. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and joining me for this month's early access episode, we have Jazz Foster. How you doing, Jazz?
Hello. I'm very tired, but we're working through it, you know?
Working through it, pushing through it. Hopefully we won't keep you too long for this one. We'll just kind of knock this one out so we can get it up for all of our wonderful patrons tomorrow morning when the deadline hits. A quick shout out to our monthly Patreon producers. Give some love to most of these at this point are just me or my family, but give some love to Pam and Bev Larson, Sherry Starkey, Teresa Wilkinson, who is Logan's mom, and myself, Trevor Starkey. Those are our monthly Patreon producers supporting us at some dollar amount and above. I don't remember what amount that is anymore, but if you want to get a monthly shout out, you can support us on Patreon up there. We also have weekly producers if you support at a certain even higher threshold that you can support us. So if you're hearing this and not one of our Patreon supporters, you can always support us at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. But thank you to those that already do and are listening to this early. So the thing I kind of pitched to bring to the table this month, given especially the weekend we were recording this on Sunday the 30th, just a couple days after the very unfortunate and untimely passing of Mr. Chadwick Boseman. And so it definitely threw me for a loop this weekend, especially because I basically finished work on Friday, I think, and kind of just crashed and took a nap for a little bit, and I woke up and this was the first thing I saw was the news that he had passed, and was like, what? No, that's not possible. And sure enough, digging into it deeper just kind of really sidelined me and just put me in a funk the rest of the night and the rest of the weekend that we've had, admittedly. And so it got me thinking of kind of other times in my life that's happened, really. And I really only think I have a couple that I can really kind of latch onto that were really monumental. Whoa, this was such a big thing that, these larger than life characters that I don't have any kind of personal connection to, but I very much admired their work, and kind of the untimeliness of their passing. The two in particular that I have off the top of my head really are Heath Ledger when he passed away, and then also Robin Williams. And Robin Williams is probably the one that has hit me the hardest in my life, just in general, because he was such a steadfast figure throughout my life up until his unfortunate passing, be it in Aladdin, but I also grew up in a time where Mork and Mindy was on Nick at Night, and so I grew up watching that show and just his comedy specials and stuff, and he's just such a grandiose, larger than life character that for him to suddenly not be there anymore was shocking and just really hit hard.
Yeah.
And I remember going back at that time and immediately the first thing I did was I went and watched Hook, which much like this weekend I've gone back and rewatched Black Panther, has a very different light in the context of that. Hook in particular, there's constantly talk about death, whether the debate between whether death is the next big adventure or life is the next big adventure draws a whole new meaning when spoken of in the context of Robin Williams passing in particular.
Sure.
Even with Heath Ledger, Heath Ledger passing before The Dark Knight even came out meant you could only ever watch Dark Knight in the context of his passing. And there was a moment at the end of that film where they talk about being destined to do this for all time, and in particular, I think the Joker has a line that says you see the real measure of a man when they're facing death, and that resonated, and to see Heath Ledger do some of his ostensibly best work kind of in his final days was just another kind of like tragic, especially as somebody who was like at that time studying theater, wanting to be an actor and all that kind of stuff. It really resonated with me. So Chadwick Boseman, being the latest in this, not even necessarily for me. Like obviously I loved and appreciated his work, but seeing his death in the context of all of the Black Lives Matter activity that we've seen in the last few months just is, and that he was a beacon to so many of my black friends, and just the black community. As a white guy, like I absolutely don't want to like feel like I'm ever like imposing or trying to like take away any of that energy, but like seeing that culture has lost such a great icon. Not only playing, Black Panther and T'Challa, but like he'd played Jackie Robinson, which is one of the first things I got to see him in 42, and he's played so many of these iconic other characters, and there were just so many more that he inevitably would have played had he lived to see it. It's another just terrible example of like being characters. People are their time is cut short far too often, and we don't see them because we don't know all those people, but seeing it in celebrities and stuff is certainly something that is it absolutely took me for a loop this time. So I guess I wanted to throw it out to you there, Jazz, if you have any kind of other iconic kind of moments or deaths that have really like impacted you in this similar way.
Sure. I remember Robin Williams passing, and he was one of those, like, I remember where I was when I found out. I was working at a Subway, summer vacation. My friend and I were both working there. We found out together. And it was a very surreal moment, because Robin Williams was a lot of my childhood in a way that maybe was unexpected, because he was, Genie in Aladdin. He was in Good Will Hunting, which is maybe not a childhood movie for a lot of people, but I grew up in Boston, and so it's a quintessential Boston movie, and one of the ones you had to watch, and I loved it a lot. And he was in Dead Poets Society, which was big for me as someone that was really passionate about English and who ended up being an English major. Like, that was another big one. So it wasn't even his comedies necessarily, but like a lot of his more serious work. So definitely him. I think the celebrity death that impacted me the most was actually Anthony Bourdain, a few years ago, for a lot of reasons. Bourdain was like, I remember his show, Parts Unknown, being the one show that my whole family could agree on to watch with dinner. If we ever sat down, like my mom, my dad, my sister, and I, it was the one thing we'd all be like happy to watch together, was Anthony Bourdain. And we all loved him. I got his cookbook for my mom for Christmas one year. Like, that one was a really hard one to wake up to, and it was harder still knowing how he died, and how it became such a controversial thing. And Bourdain committed suicide, and a lot of people denied that, and how it became a whole conversation around mental health, and if it's real, like if he really killed himself, or it was maybe he overdosed and all this stuff. It was like a very weird, like, it almost felt traumatic to be reliving that over and over and over again as people argued over whether it was intentional or not that he died, when really it should have just been sad that he died. I don't know, I took it very personally, and it's not like I knew him, but it was very personal to me.
Yeah, I remember that being the same with Robin Williams. The idea that he had hung himself was just like, how? That it was so, like, that news was as shocking as anything else, it seemed.
Yeah, I would agree, and it was, that I think with both of those people, everyone thought they were past that, so to speak, and it's like, to tie it to Boseman, I think it's a chilling reminder that, like, you don't really ever know what someone's going through unless they tell you, and celebrities are never going to tell you, because it's not, you don't know them personally, but it's an image thing, and the strength it takes to go through cancer and not tell anybody is insane. I can't imagine. And in a lot of ways, mental health is the same way, and a lot of these deaths are really tragic for the fact that they were suffering alone for so long. Yeah. I would say the other one for me, and this is maybe like a silly one, but Casey Kasem really affected me when he died.
Well, you obviously, Casey Kasem, obviously very prominent in the Scooby-Doo realm, so I absolutely understand that one.
You knew, yeah. Casey Kasem was the original voice of Shaggy, who is arguably the most iconic voice from Scooby-Doo. Because he has the weirdest voice, right? And it's Matthew Lillard nowadays, but in the original series up until like 2003 or 4, I think, it was Casey Kasem. For all the movies and all the shows up until that point. So hearing that he died, and he did so much, and he was a radio personality, and he did all these voices, but for me, he was Shaggy. And that was like a very bizarre like changing of the guard, even though he hadn't played Shaggy for a decent amount of time when he died. That was one that affected me in a way that I didn't really expect.
Yeah.
I think, if I recall, he was just like old. That was
I think
how
so.
He died. Yeah.
And I feel like I just had to look it up because I feel like I remember before he passed, like there had been this story that he'd just gone missing. Like he just disappeared for a month and nobody could find him or something like that. I think I'm remembering the right person, but yeah, I remember weirdly enough. Obviously, like I grew up with a lot of his Scooby-Doo. I was never as into Scooby-Doo as you were, but I knew him from that. And like America Top 40 kind of thing. Like he was basically Ryan Seacrest before Ryan Seacrest was a thing. And
Man,
and so much of like Ryan Seacrest's career is basically just this generation's version of what Casey Kasem was.
He's
and
a
I remember
Casey Kasem reboot. Oh, God.
Exactly, yeah. Like Casey Kasem and Dick Clark. That is the Ryan Seacrest. I remember Casey Kasem like hearing the Top 40 stuff. I don't remember how or why, but like it was the constant thing that was playing when I worked Sam's Club closing shifts, and so like after the store would close, and like all of us would have to just go to the clothing section and like fold all the clothes until like the end of our shifts or whatever. Like that's what would be playing over the speakers would be like Casey Kasem and like that week's Top 40 or something like that. So that's but yeah, I definitely didn't have the connection to him so much so that when like you mentioned that was a death that impacted you, I was like, oh, I didn't remember that he'd passed. Like I'm sure I knew it at the time, and it kind of came and went in my mind, but he was one of those that I thought like may have still been out there doing something.
Yeah. I acknowledge it's a weird one, but Scooby-Doo was it's still a huge thing for me, but certainly as a kid, like I identified with Velma more than any character, and this was before I was blind. I could see as a kid. Amazing. So it's not like I looked like her then, but like I just wanted to be that smart all the time. Never really managed it, but the aspiration was there. So Scooby-Doo was always like the biggest cartoon for me. And so when a piece of that died, it was very gutting in a weird way, because it wasn't like a real person that you could see, where like Robin Williams and Anthony Bourdain, like they weren't characters, even when they played other people, they were still themselves. Casey Kasem was a cartoon to me. He was a voice, but it was still impactful.
Yeah. One that like just talking about this has reminded me is, and it's not one that was like probably super impactful, in part because he'd kind of fallen out from grace and everything, but like when you were like, I remember where I was when I read that Michael Jackson had passed away. I was working on a show we were doing called Columbinus, that I've talked about maybe I think once or twice on the podcast and stuff before, but it was basically we were doing a show inspired by the Columbine shooting on the 10th anniversary of Columbine, and like for a few weeks around that. And I remember showing up at the theater either for a pickup rehearsal or just to do the show one night and seeing the news that Michael Jackson had passed away, and just being like I think we were all kind of stunned by it, but it was also like in the context of the show we were doing was like not even like remotely top tier or anything like that. It was just like it was like the thing we were all focused on was so much more tragic than Michael Jackson's passing. But so like I probably didn't like ever really get a chance to properly like grieve and mourn that. But also, you know, it was 2009. It was years after he'd kind of like fallen from pop culture grace. He was
Sure.
still, you know, king of pop and all that, but like he hadn't been doing too much in making waves and stuff. And his, you know, his glory days were certainly the 80s and 90s, I would say. But that was like he was, you know, a very, you know, instrumental figure of my childhood. So when he did finally pass, even that was like him passing too soon and a surprise to everybody, because again that's another one that had like all sorts of weird circumstances around it. In hindsight and everything, but like that, and then I also like I never at the time I never really understood the hubbub behind it, but I remember distinctly, I want to say when I was in middle school, Princess Diana was like her death was constantly like the thing that was shown on Channel 1 News every day in middle school and stuff, and it was just like following that story for weeks on end because of the impact of it. And it was just one of those like the thing I remember most closely linking to on that was that like her bodyguard that also died was named Trevor, and that was like the first time I had ever heard like Trevor spoken in like a pop culture sense or something like that.
Sure.
And I remember latching to that little detail about the thing, despite not really knowing who Princess Di was before any of this, like outside of like, oh, okay, she's, you know, married Prince Charles or whatever. Like I was not, you know, I was not following like the royal scene or anything like that. So it was just like I felt like it was such an overblown story, but it was clearly also just a very impactful one at that, you know, at that time. That was, you know, the mid 90s basically when that happened. So yeah, that was another one that just like jumps out at me as I kind of think back on some of these stories. Not necessarily a cultural touchstone for me, but certainly for like the world around me. I saw that, you know, happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's weird, and like I always see every time these kinds of things come up and people, you know, talk about like people pass judgment on how, you know, people are responding to it. I'm like, everybody grieves differently. And I saw a tweet, I think yesterday or today, specifically that said something to the effect of like, usually when, you know, we grieve a celebrity like this that we didn't know, we didn't have any personal connection with, it's actually a like we're grieving something else that we didn't, that is more personal to us, but like this is the avenue that we're grieving it, or this is the lens through which we're grieving it. And so that's something that's sitting with me right now in terms of like with Chadwick Boseman. Like obviously again, I didn't know him or anything like that, but I'm grieving for just the terrible societal woes that like the black community are having to deal with right now that I will never have to personally experience in my, you know, quote unquote fortunate whiteness or whatever. And so like him passing is like flooding out all sorts of other Black Lives Matter kinds of things. And yeah, that the fact that this was something that he'd been doing and had been suffering with since 2016 privately and whatnot, like seeing the videos that have come out of him, you know, responding to kind of questions from children who weren't going to get to see Black Panther because they were going to die of cancer before that, and like the putting those kinds of responses that were emotional beforehand but now in a completely new light, that he was dealing with some of those same things, is just absolutely like devastating. And I mourn for him and all those really infected, and I will never be one of those people that's like, I will try to never be one of those people that is out there saying like, that is out there judging people mourning celebrities because like grieve in the way that you need to grieve. Who am I to like tell you how to grieve one way or another? Like that's not my place. And if you feel so impacted by somebody that you didn't know, but somebody whose work you admire or something like that, grieve for that work. I grieve for this incredible talent who, we will not get to see any more new stuff from them. I'm less concerned about what this means for Black Panther 2 or anything like that. Obviously that will come and whatnot, but like that would have been another very impactful performance from this very talented and charismatic actor. And so it's something that I think, just with everything else going on, and also just the fact that it's weird in this global pandemic, because I half expect opening up my feed to see somebody new has passed from COVID or something like that.
Sure.
And that this was completely, unrelated to all of that. This was outside of the COVID sphere is another thing that like sends this one for a loop and leaves this one a little extra jarring, that this wasn't a COVID thing. This is something he'd been dealing with and suffering from for 4 years and fighting through. And like seeing, I read Ryan Coogler kind of had a big thing on it today, and Ryan Coogler realizing like he didn't know about the cancer, and not realizing until the statement got posted the other day that Chadwick Boseman had basically had cancer in the entire time that he knew him.
Sure.
And a lot of people, especially in kind of that Marvel sphere, it seems, kind of fell into that bubble. It's just a very tragic kind of thing. And it's left me grappling with a lot of things outside of just like all of this. So
sure.
I appreciate having somebody to talk to about it.
Yeah. Oh, of course. Anytime. I think that he had an incredible amount of poise to live the way that he did, and to give the amount of himself that he gave, knowing that he didn't have a lot of himself left, because fighting cancer takes so much out of you. Hell, just chemotherapy takes so much out of you. Take out the illness, like just that as a treatment is so brutal and exhausting, and he was still he was a larger than life presence, and he gave so much. I think he is a huge loss in a lot of ways, to have lost him. And I mourn for the stories that we're not going to see anymore, because I'm sure there were plenty of movies that would have been written with him in mind for Black protagonists that we won't see anymore, because now he's not here, so we don't get those stories. And that's not fair, because it's not really how it works with white actors. You write the story and then you pick the actor, and I think when it's not a white dude, I think you pick the actor and you write the story. And I don't know, because I'm white, so it may not work that way, but it does seem like we get less of the stories that aren't about us, I guess. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to celebrate the stories that we do have because of him, the stories that we got because of him. And I think it's important to celebrate that representation that he allowed, that he, not that he allowed, but like that he gave us.
Yeah.
Because it was a big milestone when Black Panther was announced and became a movie, and then we got Miles Morales shortly thereafter, and it has turned into not really a wave, because there's still not enough of it, but we're getting something. And that's meaningful, and I think a lot of that comes pretty directly from his performance as Black Panther and the way that sort of swept across the world. So he certainly changed the face of the media that we get.
I mean, the fact that like Black Panther went out there and made $1 billion, blew a ton of people away at the time. And it clearly showed that like there is an audience that was very hungry for that kind of story. I mean, I was looking back through my tweets, and I saw the movie like 3 or 4 times in theaters.
Sure.
As milquetoast most white guy. And in particular, I remember thinking at the time, and I think I like one of the, I guess, not good things to come out of this, but one of the things that I think is being reexamined as a result of this is when Black Panther came out, everybody, like, there was so much attention paid to Michael B. Jordan's performance as Killmonger because he has the flashier, more fun role, as most villains get. And one of the things that I thought at the time was unfortunate was that that Boseman's T'Challa was getting overlooked. It felt because he had to be the more poised and the more regal kind of character. He didn't get to be flashy and big and grandiose and stuff, and so much of what he brings to that movie is in the quieter moments, but he brings so much to that movie, as he did with all of his performances. Like I said, I saw 42 and really loved what he brought to the role of Jackie Robinson, having to be that kind of character that doesn't get to be mad. And it's I'm sure, I mean, based on what I see just in media, that is clearly the black story, the African American story of like that we saw with Obama, and we see just every day, it seems, that like if a black person isn't being the most put together person, anybody who's against them will tear them apart. And seeing those kinds of stories told through Chadwick Boseman really certainly was something that I had not seen on screen myself, and just seems to constantly be reinforced in the stories I see since, in the media I see, and the friends that I know that have to go through those kinds of things on a daily basis, and it's just incredibly unfortunate. So I mourn for him. I mourn for the community that has lost him. I mourn for his family, friends, and all the stories that will be untold, as you kind of alluded to. It's unfortunate stuff. Yeah. Any others, or any other closing thoughts?
You mentioned COVID deaths and how that sort of weighs on us too, and it did remind me, an old boy bander died of COVID, and that was impactful for me. Like, not in a it was personal. It's not like I cried or whatever, because it's a boy band that I listened to when I was 10, but it was a very bizarre reminder that, like, I think for all that we see the numbers of COVID, infections and deaths even in America, it's very easy to write it off as something that's sort of distant and not necessarily relevant to you. And even, in the service industry that I'm in, I wear the mask and I go to work and people don't wear the mask, and you start to think like, well, man, does it matter, right? And seeing, his name was Chris Truesdale. He was in Dream Street. For any of you niche boy bander fans out there, it was Jesse McCartney's boy band in 2004. But it was very jarring to me because, he was not much older than I am. He was, I think, 30?
34.
Did you look this up really quickly, or did you know that off?
Yes, I looked up when you started mentioning it.
If you knew how old Chris Truesdale was, I would have shit bricks, dude.
No, I'm looking at it on my phone right now. I looked up, before you mentioned Chris Truesdale, I had looked up boy band member dies of COVID.
That is so
boy band
up.
member dies of COVID, and it was the first thing that came up, and so yeah.
Chris Truesdale, the rest of the band did a very solemn tribute over Zoom, because you can't get together because it's COVID. So he's a little older than me than I thought, but it's still close enough that it was a reminder that no, this could affect anybody at any time, and this was someone that you listened to as a kid, and he's dead now because of this thing that people still don't really take seriously. So
people are out there denying and saying doesn't exist.
Yeah, that was a weird one to grapple with, and like I said, it's not like it changed my life and I didn't cry, but it was very solemn to think back to being 9 and having the Dream Street CD in my little bright orange CD player, just walking around listening to that, and now that guy is dead because of a sickness that we could have controlled and we didn't, and people lose their lives to it, and it is real. So that affected me. Yeah. And so many people, COVID has obviously gotten a lot of people, and it's never real until it's somebody famous or someone you know, and that's not fair because it's real no matter who it is. But obviously, it affects you more when it's personal. So.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a tragic one that I had missed because Dream Street would have been like well after the time I was paying any attention to boy bands.
Sure, and again, not popular. I mean, they were.
But yeah, like he's younger than me. Like dying at 34, he's younger than me. So that definitely
Sure.
like now it's impactful. Like now
Yeah.
reading that story, just reading that headline, I'm like, oh shit.
Yeah, he was young. Like I said, it was Jesse McCartney's boy bands. They were all like that age.
Yeah. It's tragic and unfortunate that we see that kind of stuff. One last one that I just wanted to touch on that I just thought of is Alan Rickman when he passed.
Sure.
That was another one that obviously I like being a fan of Alan Rickman since like Die Hard and stuff. Like Die Hard and Dogma were like pre-Snape the two things I like most associated with Alan Rickman.
Yeah.
And Dogma is like probably the only movie in the like Kevin Smith View Askew universe that I really actually sat down and watched. And I don't remember why I watched it, but like I remember watching it and just loving the sardonic tone that Alan Rickman was bringing to that movie. So like that's weirdly one of the things that always stands out for me. But obviously, like of course, he was also incredibly impactful as Snape in all the Harry Potter films.
Sure.
And is like people can't think of anybody else being in that role kind of thing. And so his untimely death was another one that was just like, oh, that was sad to see go. Sad to see him pass.
He was also in Bottle Shock, which was a movie my parents really liked, which was about like, have you ever seen Bottle Shock?
I have not, no.
Oh, it's about the wine wars in the 70s.
Okay.
Based on a true story. It was like California, a vineyard in California challenged a vineyard in Paris to a blind taste test to see who made better wine, because it was when California was still being written off. Anyway, Rickman's in that. And that was a movie for me that is memorable just because, like I said, my parents liked it. He was obviously really impactful as Snape, but as someone that doesn't like Snape as a character, I can't say that Rickman grew on me from that. But Bottle Shock was one.
That's fair.
Yeah. And yeah, that I remember. I don't remember exactly where I was, but I remember when he died because I remember it did feel like, especially in our age range, because he was Snape, it felt like a lot of people sort of like gasped collectively.
Yeah.
Like everyone sort of drew in a breath.
Yeah.
Well, it's amazing the impact that people can have on us when we don't know them.
It is, yeah. Even despite not knowing them or that kind of stuff, it's like the one of the ones that I've been fearing for years now. Or actually, I guess a pair of them is when Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart inevitably pass.
Sure.
They will be just that'll be like a devastating moment for, a whole generation of people, if not many. And like realizing that they're, I think, in their 90s or something like that. It's like, it's only a matter of time, and we're on borrowed time for so many of those anyway.
No kidding.
So yeah, it's definitely interesting to like, when these kinds of things flare up and who really does have those impacts. I remember Anthony Bourdain being a big one, but as somebody that never had really watched his shows or really hadn't been into cooking or anything like that, I didn't follow him enough to really have any kind of personal attachment, but I saw the people that did.
Sure.
And it's certainly always, touching and devastating, and I always want to just be as supportive as I can when people are going through that, because you don't know what they're actually responding to when they're grieving to that kind of stuff.
Yeah. God, I went to work in tears when Bourdain died.
Yeah.
It was a hard thing to wake up to.
Well, I think we can probably leave it at that. Wrap up this episode, rather than just continue to get sad about sad things.
Sure.
Hug those you love when you can. I guess is the key takeaway I have, because you never know. Yeah, you never know when's the last you're gonna get. You can follow Jazz at Jazz_Foster. Anything you want to give a shout out to or give some love to, Jazz?
Yeah. the hockey playoffs are happening, the NBA playoffs are happening, and even if you're not a sports fan, I think it's interesting to think about the people who are sacrificing both their health and their time spent with family to try to entertain us in a time that is uncertain and a little scary. So even if you don't watch the games, maybe just spare a thought for a professional athlete that's sort of not being home just to like play the sports ball so you can cheer for them,
Yeah, even that reminded me, and it was like related, unrelated, but like Kobe earlier this year, like that was just a devastating, tragic one.
Yeah.
As well. That I didn't have a personal connection to, but like when that happened, I was shocked by it, and everybody else, who did have more of a sports connection, I was like, I'm so sorry for your loss. It's just they're always out there. Yeah. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. I don't have anything to shout out really, apart from like go and like if you listen to this episode and have thought on your own, kind of like somebody who you mourn their passing, go check out some of their work, go honor their legacy. In that context, like I said, I sat down and rewatched Black Panther, like a lot of people have this weekend. And it's just a very, very powerful story, and from a person taken from us far too soon.
Yeah.
You can follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site, or check out thatnerdysite.com for all the latest. If you did like what you heard, please rate, review, like, subscribe. And if you're not already a supporter of us on Patreon, maybe consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, where every patron gets early access to episodes like this one. Thank you again, Jazz, for sitting down and letting me just kind of talk through this stuff that's been like weighing on me, kind of on my mind this weekend. I'm glad we were able to kind of like just sit down and chat about this. Thank you for listening. As always, stay nerdy and be good to each other.